Hello, good evening, and thanks for joining me for this Sociology live stream on analysing functionalism. And as you can see, I'm all on my own this evening. So if you can join in with the activities, obviously we always want you to do that, but particularly want you to do it today, because otherwise it's just me talking. I need someone to bounce off. So do please get do please get involved with the activities. If you are, good evening Ben, and good evening Skincare with K, great to see you. If you could give us a thumbs up for these videos, that would always be really useful, because it lets other people know and find them, which is great. And subscribe if you're not already, or I imagine you probably are if you saw the videos coming on. So yeah, without further ado, we will go to the activities, and we're going to start with, as has sort of become a bit of a tradition on these ones, we're going to start with a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So this is where you get 2 minutes. I ask you to give a 5 of something, 4 of something, 3 of something, 2 of something, and 1 of something. So it's kind of checking your knowledge on functionalism, really. And remember, you can bring things in from topic areas here, although I'm sort of specified 2 of them here from your core topics. So I want to know 5 functionalist sociologists. That can be any functionalists from any topic that you study. I want 4 functions of crime and deviance. So, as according to functionalists, obviously other theorists will have ideas about functions of both crime and deviance and education. I'm wanting kind of functionalist ones. For 4 and 3, 2 types of socialization, which I think you'll be able to think of. And then the last one, a functionalist analogy. There are actually a couple. There's one which I had in mind, but there are a couple of things you could go for here. So that's where something where the functionalists suggest that something is like something else. Make an analogy. So it might be society is like something, the family is like something. There are a few possible ways you could go with that one. Okay, so you've got 2 minutes. If you don't have to think of all 5, you can jot them in as you go, but see how you do.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So with the 2 types of socialization, you might want to think about Parsons, Talcott Parsons. Okay, Gabby's come in with some functions of crime and deviance. Very good. The idea of kind of warning device, safety valve, crime need to show right and wrong. Okay, we've got Gabby's also come in with 2 types of socialization, primary and secondary. We've got some suggested functionalist sociologists here. Who've we got? We've got Durkheim, Blau and Duncan. Okay, yeah, absolutely. Parsons, Davison, Moore. I always say with these, if there's any that you don't know, don't worry about it. It might be that they do a topic that you don't do, or just the teachers taught them a sociologist. Yeah, the different ones in different textbooks and things like that. So if you're looking at Blau and Duncan and thinking I've not heard of them, don't worry if you haven't. Kind of comes in quite nicely with stratification, as do Davison and Moore, but obviously you do Davison Moore in education as well. We've got from Miranda the organic analogy. Society is like an organism or a human body. So there we go for functionalist analogy.
5, 4,
we haven't added functions of education
3,
yet, I don't think, unless I've just not seen
2,
them.
1.
Okay. Very good. Just in case anyone's typing, I'll just wait a moment. Bowles and Gintis would be Marxist rather than functionalist. So, I want to talk about them in your Marxist section. But other than that, we've got some functionalists there. Okay, I'm gonna go through them. If someone is typing out 3 functions of education, you'll probably get them out. They'll come up on my screen before we get there anyway, so that's okay. Could we talk about the bridge for Parsons? So the bridge between, uh, yeah, bridge between home and society, or home and work. Yeah, absolutely. And school acting in that way, you absolutely could. Well, as a function of education, potentially, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but that would be one of them, definitely. Okay, so we got some sociology suggested up there for functionalists. The ones I went with were Durkheim, Parsons, Merton, Albert Cohen, and Travis Hershey. Obviously, Cohen and Hershey are kind of crime and deviance type ones. Other people went with Davis and Moore that you get from education or stratification. Yeah, there are people, depending on your topics, there are others that you could come up with. We've got a few in global development and things like that as well. Okay. For functions of crime and deviance, so we had some good ones earlier from I think it was Gabby, and these are essentially some of them at least are the same as Gabby's, just slightly worded slightly differently. Boundary maintenance, so setting the boundaries of what's acceptable within society. Adaptation and change is an interesting one. The idea that deviance allows society to change, because when if something starts to become normal but is against the rules, then that can help push and change the rules and change society. If no one ever deviated from the norms, then everything would all just stay the same all the time. Reinforcing the value consensus is obviously related to that boundary maintenance idea, but it's a kind of particular one. And the sort of safety valve, which I think Gabby had that one as well. It can sort of let off some steam. That one's Kingsley Davis, which is the same person as Davis and Moore, incidentally. Yeah. Okay, excellent. The others were Durkheim. Okay, three functionalists. Functions of education. We had the bridge between home and work in the chat window, which is great. Role allocation, so Davis and Moore and Parsons again. The teaching of specialist skills. Secondary socialization. Yeah, I'm sure we could come up with some others there. The two types of socialization that I was thinking of were primary and secondary, which I think we had. So that was Gabby again. Well done. And I also went with the organic analogy, sometimes described as the human body analogy. It did occur to me that some people might have gone with the warm bath theory from families and households, if you do that as your topic, paper 2 topic, which is a kind of an analogy as well, isn't it? Suggesting that the family is like a warm bath. Okay, well done, very good. So we got some good knowledge on our functionalists and functionalism. So let's start thinking about this in terms of some analysis now. So this activity is not one we do very often on from our sociology ones. Is I'm going to give you a kind of jumbled up paragraph. Well, it's not necessarily a full paragraph, but a jumbled up point, a few sentences, which I want you to try and rearrange to make it coherent. A big part of analysis is the idea of sort of chains of analysis or logical chains of reason. What I want is that it to be coherent, for it to make sense. So there's a range of accurate points here, but it doesn't flow. It doesn't flow into a clear argument that explains the content that's there. So it might take you a little bit of time just to read them and try and decide where this is perhaps starting. But can you suggest an order for these? So you just need to put the numbers in what you think would be the most appropriate or correct order. Although there's one that's going to come up as the right answer, there are probably a couple of ways that you could potentially order this and it would be reasonably coherent, but there is one that flows the best, I would say. So it's all about socialization and how that might create a value consensus or cause social cohesion. But how can we arrange this argument in a way that makes sense. Gabby's come in quickly. I'm going to check. Everyone keep going. I'm just going to check Gabby, see if that one's how I'd have got it. Really close. There's two. You've got two that I'd swap round, Gabby. Well, let's have a look at Evelyn's. I think you. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now somehow, even though yours isn't the same, you've got two I'd swap round, for slightly different reasons. But you're both absolutely very close. So Gabby and Evelyn have got very close to my order. I suppose one thing would be to think about where do you think should the end be? What would you finish with? Let's have a look at Gabby's now. All right, no. So both Gabby and Evelyn have started correctly. It's started where I'd start. So Tolkien Parsons arguing that institutions perform primary and secondary socialisation, then explaining that primary socialisation took place in families. Gabby's first, Evelyn. Nope. Let me just. Oh, hang on. Oh, I can see what's causing. No, that's right. And then, yes, so then it would be 1. So Evelyn was right. So Evelyn's first 3 are right. So we've got, institutions perform primary and secondary socialisation. Primary socialisation teaches us particularistic values. Secondary socialisation occurs through education and other places. So, but then I would go 4 next, because it's the secondary socialisation that's teaching people the universal norms and values of society rather than the particularistic ones. And then our kind of finishing point would be 3, which Gabby did have on her first one. I feel that's the kind of the end of the point, the output. If you think about it as an input and an output, the input is the socialisation. What's the output? It's value consensus and social cohesion. So that would be my preferred order. As I said, it's not, it would be possible to order these in different ways and it still makes sense and you'd understand what was being said. But if you think about analysis, both as links in a chain or stepping stones across a pond, but also in terms of kind of an input and an output and how you get from one to the other, that can help really with this. I think with that in mind, with these ideas in mind, let's look at another way of doing this. There's the finished one, by the way. 5, 2, 1, 4, 3. So between Gabby and Evelyn got really, really close. Just a couple in a different order from how I'd have done it. But yeah, just to kind of follow this idea further with the analysis and the kind of chain of analysis, we'll do it with a stepping stones activity. Here we've got the starting point and the end point, and it's thinking about how we get from one to the other. So this, I've taken each bit from kind of functionalist ideas, either really general or that would come up in your core topic. So this does come up in education. This is kind of Davidson Moore's idea about meritocracy and role allocation. If you do stratification, I got the impression perhaps at least 1 or 2 of you do, even though that that's not the most popular section B topic, but it's one that's growing, becoming more popular. If you do stratification, you also would be familiar with it from there as well. We've got the idea of a system of unequal rewards. So in other words, people getting paid different things for different jobs leads to meritocratic role allocation. Okay, now what you might find is that sometimes students would write that. They might say Davidson Moore argued that, and then just say that and move on, which is accurate, and we'll get AO1 and maybe some AO2 for knowing it was Davidson Moore and applying it to the right depending on what the question was, choosing the right information to write about in the question. But where the analysis will come in will be explaining how one leads to the other, kind of taking us through the process. How does that have that outcome? How does 1 lead to 5? We need to add a few stones along the way, and to be honest, the more stepping stones we can add, the better. The more we can, the more stages we can add. So, does anyone feel they could explain this, or think of another stage at least? Don't need to do the full thing. So, a system of unequal rewards. What we're essentially saying there is differential pay. Jobs. If you're a brain surgeon, it gets paid more than if you're a cleaner or whatever. Okay. This helps lead to meritocratic role allocation. How? How does that system of unequal rewards mean that the people who work harder at school, or who are more talented or clever, get the higher paying jobs? What are the missing steps? This is kind of the Davis and Moore's key argument. Ooh, I've stumped you. Anyone want to suggest a step along the way? Or shall I take you through this one? I'll give you the next step. Let's see if we can... Oh, so Miranda's saying achieve higher grades. That definitely is part of it, because to access these sorts of jobs, you would... Oh, Evelyn's coming. Oh, fantastic. So Miranda's absolutely right. To get these jobs, you need to achieve higher grades, so that there needs to be like a bit of an incentive to try hard to get these higher grades, yeah? Or so that Evelyn's saying the most functionally important roles, like doctor, are the most paid jobs. Okay, these encourage people to work hard for those jobs at school, and the most talented people, or the most hardworking people, or a combination of the two, are selected. And that is what we've done. That is excellent. So those jobs deemed to be more functionally important, and you've given the example of doctors could command the higher salaries. This is an incentive to work and study hard to gain the necessary skills and qualifications. The argument goes from Davis and Moore. I don't know whether I agree with this, but we're not evaluating today. But their argument is, people wouldn't bother putting all that effort in if they weren't going to get a high salary. Therefore, the prospect of a higher salary gives people an incentive that ensures that those with the most talent, or who put in the most effort, get those roles, and this leads to meritocratic role allocation. So Evelyn did a fantastic job on that, basically exactly what I've put. And explaining that process, explaining that, rather than just stating it as Davis and Moore says this, but saying how that makes sense, how that works, how Davis and Moore's point works, is really where the AO3, the analysis marks, come in. Obviously, we could then go on to evaluate it, and I think we should, and there are a few ways you could do. Are the most functionally important jobs really the ones that get paid the most? Things like childcare, care of elderly people, etc., are very, very important jobs in society, don't get paid very well. And some jobs are very well paid that perhaps aren't that functionally important. We could debate which ones those might be, but obviously some people find Premiership football very important, but perhaps not in the same way that heart surgery is. And obviously then you've also got the kind of Bowles and Gintis meritocracy is a myth argument from the Marxists, which you could bring in as evaluation. But in terms of the analysis, it's explaining that yes, the knowledge is that Davis and Moore argued this, but what did their argument actually mean? How did it work? That's some really good analysis when you really explain it. Okay, so well done. Fantastic. Okay, so thinking about some of these functionalist ideas, and the idea that a big part for functionalists is about consensus, value consensus, and trying to have a cohesive society, social cohesion, and that the various institutions in society help to manage this. They perform these essential functions that helps to cause society to be cohesive and stable and have a consensus, I'm going to spin the wheel and see, pick an institution or an aspect of society, and I want you to think about how that particular aspect helps society be cohesive. Now, some of this might echo things we've already kind of touched on. We might have said them in our first activity, just as a kind of one word or a two word thing. But here we want a bit more analysis. So we're not just saying this is a function of that institution, but how does it achieve social cohesion? How does that aspect of the institution do that? So let's spin the wheel, see where it lands. Where's it going to stop? Education. Okay, so how does education create social cohesion? Any thoughts? According to functionalists, can you think of any features of education that help to keep us a sort of cohesive, stable society with a value consensus, without too much conflict and instability? Society that works, functions. Obviously, because I've asked you to explain it a bit, I'm not anticipating instant answers. But I know you know some of this because we've already talked about some of it. Okay, got a few coming through. Evelyn and Miranda have suggested some. So Evelyn said people are taught mainstream norms and values at school through secondary socialization. Absolutely. So that socialization process teaches people those mainstream universal norms and values, which helps establish a value consensus, which in turn leads to value social cohesion. Miranda has made very similar points. Secondary socialization experience with education where norms and values of society are learned. Absolutely. So that is a really key point. Other points we've already touched on could lead to this as well. Can you think why might meritocracy help social cohesion? Why might it be good for the functioning of society and the sort of cohesion of society for role allocation to be meritocratic? We've already talked also that stuff about the bridge between home and work that someone mentioned earlier. That helps social cohesion too. Okay. The point I was making about meritocracy, if someone's typing it, don't worry, I'm sure we won't say exactly the same point, and I'll pick up your point as well. But is if people feel, and this obviously Marxists would say that they shouldn't feel this way, but if people feel that the system's fair, that there's fairness in society, then that helps with social cohesion. People sort of accept how things are. And obviously functionalists think that it is fair, that it's not just that it seems to be fair, but that it actually is fair. And that the right people are doing the right jobs, which helps with social cohesion as well. Okay. What have we got down there? Social cohesion promoted through both the formal and the informal curriculum. So things like history, we often say, so in terms of formal curriculum, doing some of this, history helps people feel, this is Durkheim's argument, the teaching of history helps people feel like they're part of something bigger. He sort of thought that people would be taught primarily their own national history, and that would make them feel like they weren't just an individual or part of a family, but part of a larger community, feel part of that social coherent society, which is quite interesting, because obviously a lot of the time we don't just learn the sort of national story kind of thing, although there was a push for that sort of about 10 years or so ago. There was a push on a policy level, education policy level, to try and make history more like that. We actually spend a lot of time on sort of German history and American history, don't we? Really, in school. But that's an interesting idea, and it's also why sometimes, every so often, some politicians, particularly sort of conservative or reform type politicians, will suggest that school history is too critical of the UK, and that we ought to be more positive. And obviously, inevitably we end up teaching about empire and things like that, and the British are often the baddies. If part of the aim of teaching is to try and make people feel part of something bigger in a positive sort of way, should we be teaching about the heroes and positive stories? Or is that not the point of teaching history? You should just teach what's true and what actually happened. So there's an interesting discussion for another time. And then also, through the informal curriculum or the hidden curriculum, there's the idea of teaching a particular sort of ethos, posters, things up on the walls, all that kind of stuff can have an impact. Okay. Next up then, we'll spin the wheel again. Okay, spinning the wheel again. Let's see where it lands now. Okay, we're on crime. So can anyone think of how crime and deviance, or the criminal justice system, anything relating to crime, might help promote social cohesion? We've kind of had this earlier in the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or some suggestions. But can you kind of explain? It's just adding a little bit more, really. Or you might have a different point that we didn't have before. But it's like, how does that actually lead to social cohesion rather than just the concept? It's always that. I always think when we're thinking about analysis, it's just about pushing for that little extra bit. It's like, oh, why? How? Just explain it a little bit more. Give you a moment or two, just because sometimes it takes a little time for the responses to come through. So your starting point might be some of those functions of crime and deviance we mentioned before, but how do they help social cohesion? Okay. A couple coming in. Oh, Lily's asking, what is social cohesion? That's a very good point. I'm using this term and not explaining what it is. So functionalists talk about social cohesion. It's about the way in which society is kind of bound together, or it very much links with ideas, as Miranda's got above, actually, about value consensus, social solidarity, society feeling coherent and well united, and all part of the same community and the same society, rather than being divided and in conflict and all that kind of thing. So social cohesion is togetherness, I suppose, social togetherness, and keeping society together and stable. And Miranda suggested that boundary maintenance in society reinforces that value consensus and social solidarity. Yeah, so knowing what's wrong, what's considered wrong and what will be punished, kind of helps maintain a shared idea of what is acceptable and what our values as a society are, and that helps keep society together, because most of the time, most of us will try and stick to the rules, and that helps society be coherent and stable. And we could do something similar with some of the other functions that we might have mentioned there. Obviously, adaptation and change helps society be coherent. You want society to organically change, or functionalists do. They don't want radical change, they don't want quick change, but they don't want society to stagnate, because then that might actually ultimately lead to radical and dramatic change, which the functionalists don't want to see, because if people feel that society isn't moving and developing as it should, then that would be a problem. Okay. Well done. Some very good answers. What did we have? Boundary maintenance. Yeah, through condemning action of the criminals, it reinforces the collective conscience and social cohesion. Okay. Right. So this should be nice and easy based on how you've been doing with this, because you're smashing this. You know your functionalism. What I want you to do here is look at this grid. There are a load of concepts in here. Quite a lot of them are functionalist concepts. There are a few that are not. I want you to give me the grid references of the ones that you think are functionalist concepts. So, for example, I'm not saying this is right or not. You might say B1 or B4. Okay. So if you spot something that you think that definitely comes from a functionalist sociologist or a functionalist idea, pop in the grid reference, and then we'll try and work out which ones we're not going on. We kind of call this activity trapdoor. So you're trying to avoid the ones that might trip you up. C4, as Lily's come in with, meritocracy. Yeah, I would agree. Meritocracy is definitely a functionalist concept. Both Davis and Moore and Talcott Parsons talk about society being meritocratic, and that being a good thing. There's some others on there that we've had today, so some of them should be pretty quick, and then others I think you will know. You don't have to try and do them all, by the way. If people are typing some in, just as Lily's done, you can do one at a time as you spot it. We've got B4 from Lily, absolutely, primary socialization. Got A3 from Gabby, absolutely, yeah, the warm bath theory is Talcott Parsons, isn't it? If anyone here doesn't do families and households, you might not have encountered that theory, but most people do family households. You'll have seen that one. Miranda's gone with D1, absolutely, the organic analogy or the human body analogy is a nice general point about functionalism, how functionalists see society in general as being like a human body. Fab. Let's see, what else have we got? Got D4 from Lily, absolutely, functional fit. Again, if you don't do families and households, you might not have encountered this one, although the concept can apply to other areas, but where you're likely to have talked about it in A-level is in families and households. The idea that certain family types are a functional fit for the society as it is at the time. So that's Talcott Parsons again, talked about the nuclear family being having a functional fit to industrial society. Yeah. A few more. Are there any others on D? We've got D1 and D4. What do we think about the others on D? D2, strain theory. Yeah, Merton is a functionalist. He often seems like a slightly unusual functionalist because he's talking about sort of dysfunctions in society as well as functions. Normally all our functionalists are all about everything working, aren't they? And obviously he's explaining a problem, which we don't always see with functionalists, but he is a functionalist, very much in that same, there's a kind of root of functionalists with all kind of Parsons and Merton and things, who passed on the same sort of concepts and ideas. Okay. Just as a sort of hint, I'm going to tell you that C1 and D3 are related to each other. They both come from the same sociologist who wrote about some societies having one and some societies having the other. And if you know which sociologist it is, you decide whether it comes under functionalism or not. Okay, I'm going to start doing it down the rows now. So A, I'm going to let you know that we have had the only functionalist concept on A, which was warm bath theory. So well done. And Miranda just put A2, which is really interesting. And it does, of course, what do we mean by a safe haven? I'm talking about the families and households concept of safe haven, which on paper, when you first read it, it seems very similar to the warm bath theory, but it is actually coming from a different perspective. So the safe haven, Zaretsky's safe haven idea, is a Marxist concept. He's describing pretty much exactly the same thing as Parsons' warm bath theory, but instead of saying that society as a whole benefits from this, he's saying that capitalism benefits from it. It helps the bosses, and helps capitalism, and so he's coming from a different perspective. That one was deliberately in there as a little, one that I thought people might say, but yeah, it is actually a Marxist concept. If we look down the B row, which ones have we had from B so far? That's okay, Miranda. That's absolutely. That's why we did it. That's why it was there. We've had B4, primary socialization. I'm going to tell you that there's only one on there that is not a functionalist concept. So there are two other functionalist concepts on the B row that we've not had yet. One we've talked about quite a lot today, so I'm assuming people have seen. They just haven't typed it down. And one which you won't, not necessarily everyone will have covered, but is from Crime and Deviance. And don't worry if you don't recognise it; it's not a problem. So Miranda, B2, absolutely, value consensus. And yes, Lily, B1, bonds of attachment, comes from Travis Hershey. That's the one I'm saying. If it's not familiar, don't worry about it. You'll have covered plenty of functionalist crime and deviance arguments. But it is quite a useful one. It's talking about reasons why people don't commit crimes is because they have these kind of bonds they're attached to, have attachments within society. And where they don't exist, where they're not there, that can lead to crime. Okay, on the C row, there is only one on there that isn't a functionalist concept. So far on there we've had C4, meritocracy. What do we think the other two might be? The one that I'm saying isn't functionalist is kind of influenced by functionalism, but is associated with a different perspective. So, Lily, C1, mechanical solidarity, is absolutely a functionalist idea, and I'll reveal it now. Mechanical solidarity and organic solidarity, they're concepts from Durkheim, where he talks about the different ways in which societies were like pre-industrial and post-industrial. In a sort of rural type society, you had mechanical solidarity. People actually knew each other and could and did the same things and all that kind of thing. Whereas in a modern complex industrial society, you have to kind of have this organic solidarity through the institutions and everything. So that was that idea. C2 was my potential kind of trapdoor trip up one, because that one is more new right. Now, new right and functionalism are closer than functionalism is to any of the other perspectives. New right was definitely developed from functionalism, but whereas functionalism tends to focus on, I guess what happens with the new right is they sort of share some of the same ideas of functionalism, but they kind of say society isn't like that. Society should be like that, but it's not. And that would be an example of that. Welfare dependency is a problem in society. From a new right perspective. So status frustration was the other one, which is Albert Cohen's subcultural theory of crime and deviance. If you've got there, sort of thing you might be doing right now or be about to do, depending on what order you're doing your topics in, etc. Which is a functionalist subcultural theory. Everything on D is functionalist. Okay, let's reveal that. Hopefully. There we go. Yeah, so just those 5 non-functionalist ideas. The rest all were. But it's given us a good chance to go over a lot of functionalism there, which is great. Okay, I'm going to come back to just me. I was going to press the wrong button there and have 2 empty screens next to me. It's been really nice talking to you this evening, and some really good answers. Your functionalism and some very good analysis. So well done. Next time, it won't just be me, so I can't remember who's joining me, but 1 or 2 others will be joining me. And we're still going to be on functionalism, but we're going to be evaluating functionalism, which we've been tempted to do on occasion today. We've started to say, oh, well, do we agree with this or whatever? But we're going to be doing a lot more evaluation next time. And we'll look at some other aspects of functionalism as well. So we'll try and avoid repeating ourselves too much. But yeah, it's going to be evaluating functionalism this time next week. Okay. Cheers, guys. See you soon. Bye-bye. And thank you very much for your answers.